Hello? Can I just give you a letter? We're doing a documentary about Scientology. Wait, I've got...
Scientology.
A religion created by a sci-fi writer, run by a mysterious leader, David Miscavige.
So this is my chance to experience
Scientology.
firsthand.
You need to leave.
How you doing, Mr. Squirrel?
You guys are trespassing.
Got anything to say?
It's okay, we have a permit.
Why are you here?
He's right behind us now.
We have their attention.
Why are they doing this? It's just not like any church that you could think of.
Gradually, I realized they were never going to let me in. I began thinking of another way inside.
I was the baddest ass dude in
Scientology.
Scientology.
You can't film me.
Scientology.
I knew that there would be consequences.
Was there someone on the inside who was somehow a mole?
Scientology.
Your happiness is a course away.
You believe so much they can convince you of anything.
Scary, huh?
Scientology.
Little bit.
Tell him to stop filming me.
Well, you're filming us.
Tell him to
Well,
stop.
what? You tell him to stop.
Tell him to stop.
You tell him to stop, and I'll tell him to stop. Thanks, guys.
They say it brainwashes people.
Do I look like I'm brainwashed to you?
Keep it going for these guys. My Scientology
you.
movie. It's a fascinating,
Thank you very much.
fascinating documentary. I was lucky enough to see it at Tribeca, and it's a beautiful piece of work and so fascinating. You know, it's the subject I feel like now more than ever is being talked about all over the world. And what brought you guys to do a deep dive on this subject?
I mean, I've been obsessed with Scientology going back decades. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's a hot subject now. You've got the Leah Remini series. Our movie is out. But there's something perennial. It's an evergreen source of material. You know, it's about religious commitment, weirdness, UFOs, a sci-fi writer who created his own religion, and allegations of people being kept against their will at a secret base in the desert outside Los Angeles. Plus Tom Cruise.
It's got all the makings of a great film. How about you, John? What was your fascination?
I wasn't as in any way in deep as Louis was.
You must have heard of it.
I'd heard of it, but I think it was actually quite useful for the film. I had more of a punter's take on Scientology, the sort of more tabloid reputation of the spaceships, and Tom Cruise is into it, and John Travolta as well. So
but John stopped me from going off the deep end and obsessing about arcane rituals.
Louis can geek out on it. And at times I wondered whether he might, I don't know, go up the bridge.
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about documentaries. It can go any which way. And, you know, the thing about this, I'm sure it evolved quite a bit through the planning process because the church, you know, didn't want to participate and these sort of things. You know, tell us a little bit about how it evolved into what it is now.
So in my day job for 20 years, I've made documentaries on TV for the BBC, and they revolve around me getting access to secret worlds, porn sets, prisons,
Nazis, yeah, exactly.
The Westboro Baptist Church, anything kind of offbeat or extreme. And so this was very different because early on it became clear that Scientology did not want to get to play ball, if you like. And so it became a process of trying to figure out how do we tell the story without them helping us out. Yeah. And we devised this technique using a kind of a movie within a movie, and using reenactments, but in a meta way, where ex-Scientologists kind of helped to direct these reenactments. And part of that was also realizing that if we did this, the Scientologists would come after us, which they have a track record of doing, and that you can kind of reveal a lot about Scientology through being stalked and harassed by a Scientologist. You know, that they come and film you, and it's both weird and really fascinating.
I mean, it was a real shot in the dark, as you can probably tell when you start watching the film. I mean, the first scene is kind of literally the first day of filming, and we had no idea if it was going to work or not. And we did the first casting for the leader of the church, David Miscavige, and we had Marty Rathburn, one of the former very senior members, helping us on the casting couch, and we didn't really know if it was going to work or not, but it seemed to. The most important thing is it almost took Marty back to that place when he was in the church. We never wanted to make a retrospective story, the history of Scientology. I mean, mainly because other people were doing it just as we started. But that was the test. Would it work? And it seemed to work, and so we kept it going. We did a casting for Tom Cruise, and it, unashamedly, we were giving them a bit of a prod, weren't we?
Well, we knew they wouldn't like it, but we wanted to treat them at the same time with, a degree of respect. Yeah. So we got this weird way of doing it, and I think it works pretty well.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of casting a Tom Cruise? How was that? I'm sure you had quite a few colorful individuals.
That was
come
hard.
in.
The Tom Cruise casting is harder than David Miscavige because a lot of actors came and tried to play a caricature of what they thought. They turn up with the glasses and the whole risky business cocktail persona. Well, I mean, I think Tom Cruise is a great actor.
He's a good actor.
Great, brilliant
so
actor.
to play a good actor, you sort of have to be a good actor. Otherwise, you just realize, that your actor isn't very good. I think the other thing to say, though, is that early on, Scientology realized, in the 50s, L. Ron Hubbard realized the benefit of having a celebrity advocate, and he recruited celebrities. So the reason we did it is, I always feel like that, in the same way as it's their most important PR tool, it can also be the most important way of revealing what's underneath Scientology. It's a way of pulling in people, showing what's going on, and finding out, how Scientology represents itself.
And did you guys have any interactions? And what were the interactions with, with the true believers, the people that really believe and really had their lives changed by this religion? I'm sure
they kept coming out. I always think, well, they didn't give you access. Well, they kind of did give us access because they kept coming out and finding me, and harassing my contributors because they're more fixated on ex-members who speak out even than they are on journalists. Yeah. So literally, Marty Rathbun, while we were filming with him, he was at an airport, and three very prominent Scientologists popped out of nowhere and began hurling abuse at him while he filmed them on his antiquated mobile phone.
You're nobody.
And kept,
You're nobody.
And then it happened again like a couple of months later. Yeah. So I was I'd like to thank the Church of Scientology for being an important part of this production.
Can you explain a little bit about the interaction with the Squirrel Busters and those elements of the church while you were filming?
Well,
what's a squirrel, John? That's how you have to start.
Well, for starters, going back to the last question, we are, according to Scientology scripture, you can correct me, you know it deeper than I do, but because we're technically journalist media, we're sort of on the same level on their tone scale as perverts.
So as a sexual pervert myself, that makes me a twofer. But the point is, what were we talking about?
Squirrel busters.
Oh yeah, squirrel busting. I was thinking about perverts, and then I just lost focus. Squirreling is when in Scientology, it's basically like being a heretic. You are using bits of Scientology but getting it wrong. You're distorting or adulterating it. Looking at it another way, it's a bit like pirating their material, because there's also this sort of corporate dimension to Scientology. In some ways, it's a bit like McDonald's, and it's a bit like going off and making a restaurant called McRonald's, and having big mix, and they're like, hang on, you're eating into our market share. So if you squirrel, that's really, really bad, and they come after you. And so squirrel busters are Scientologists who come and stop you from squirreling.
Technically, we were squirreling the day we did Marty's drills.
You've been squirreling since the day you were born.
I like a good squirrel. The people they sent along when we were squirreling, that was the first time we had an encounter with them. It's the moment in the film where they're just suddenly outside our studio filming us, and there's a very attractive young lady who turns up.
You never said that about her before.
She turns up in very inappropriate footwear, which was the thing I kept. She's in these huge, massive heels, and there's this sort of weird Three Stooges scenario where Louis sort of following them down the street as they film us and we film them. it's bizarre.
But she wasn't really a squirrel buster. Squirrel busters were the guys who came after Marty Rathbun when he left Scientology.
Right.
What she was...
They're the ones with the cameras on their hats and the sort of wacky T-shirts.
The woman who, the crews that followed us around, it turned out later, was a Scientology documentary crew that were making a film about me.
Wow.
Which I'm excited to see.
That's got to be fascinating to be, I mean, because that's the thing about the churches, you know, they rightly want to have their own opinion, so they put out their own sort of stories, their own sort of videos to sort of counteract the popular belief or the public notion of what the church is. You know, how much of a deep dive did you do to those materials? I'm sure they were sending you
I
emails,
love reading and
you...
looking at all that stuff. And in fact, it was almost in a way, I'd seen a lot of it on the web, and it was an inspiration for our way of doing the film. You know, having seen how embedded in production they are. You know, it's the Hollywood religion, not just because it has people like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, Kirstie Alley, but also because L. Ron Hubbard aspired to be a movie director. Yeah. He established the first Church of Scientology in Hollywood, and they use Hollywood-style techniques both to generate their materials, you know, their promotional, they don't put out Gideon's Bibles, but they actually send out, you know, ads on the Super Bowl, for example, or on the web. And so it felt very much in keeping, and a lot of their practices, by the way, because that's the other thing about Scientology. Probably no one else in this room other than us sort of knows what they do, right?
Well, we don't know there aren't any here.
Hey, that's a good point.
It happened in Belgium.
People are looking very uncomfortable. You know, what do they do? Scientologists, that's not an easy question to answer, but they have a set of practices, and a lot of those are almost like acting exercises, self-actualization techniques.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you ever try to read the Dianetics, you know, sort of the book of L. Ron Hubbard? I've tried to read
That's the first book. You didn't finish it, right?
I did not finish it, yeah.
It's absolute drivel.
Yeah,
and I say that with the utmost respect for all religion. It is terrible.
Yeah.
I'm amazed, but I don't think half the people in Scientology have read Dianetics. I honestly don't think you could get through that book and think, yeah, this guy really knows what he's talking about. Fetuses have memories, you know, and we need to deal with my memories that I acquired as a fetus.
Or as a mollusk. As a clam.
Well, that's later on. That's not in Dianetics. You only find that out until you've paid $20,000.
I'm sorry, I interrupted your point at once.
Well, actually,
yeah.
it's
expand on your point about the mollusk.
But the Dianetics was quite. I mean, as the director of the film, it was quite a relief because their production values are kitsch and quite low. I mean, we're a documentary, so you know, say for the Tom Cruise casting, we can't pay top dollar, so we're looking at actors, you know, who aren't A-list.
Who are starting out.
Yeah. Yes. So it was.
It will be A-list one day.
Yeah. So it was. Yeah. I think we almost surpassed.
But they did an amazing job, and we got Andrew Perez, who did an incredible job.
Who's a star, absolute star.
Playing the role of David Miscavige in a couple of the key reenactment moments, and a lot of it is to do with, you know, not creating exactly, we don't know note perfect what happened inside Scientology, but we know what Marty remembers. And so we just give him the tools and the team to almost reenact his sense of what happened, both in terms of the drills, the tech that they do, their exercises, and also his sense of the abuses and where it went wrong. And then, and in the end, it's sort of almost as much a way of understanding Marty Rathbun as an exponent of Scientology and now a critic of Scientology, and the psychology behind fundamentalist systems and religious abuse.
Yeah, I think, you know, the great thing about this documentary is, you know, there's Going Clear, obviously, which is a great documentary on Scientology, but it doesn't bring sort of the characterization of these reenactments. It's great to sort of see someone retell these stories through people, actually. So tell me if there was one story in particular that you were like, we need to reenact that, we need to share this story. I'm sure there's quite a few.
Don't open this can of worms. He's still sore at me because I kicked out one reenactment.
Let's talk about that one then.
Well, we had one which I think that the key for the reenactments was that they weren't driven by me. They were driven by the ex-Scientologists. So it wasn't like here's me making the Scientologists look weird by doing it. You know, that would just be, it would be cheap. But I think when it becomes a creation of the Scientologist or the ex-Scientologist. It feels authentic. So we had one the one we didn't use was a scene that's well attested, in which David Miscavige, who is or has been best friends with Tom Cruise, and one of the stories is that they would hang out together and skeet shoot. Right? They'd have little guns, and in a slightly macho kind of buddy way, they would shoot skeets and then talk about Scientology, I guess. That part is more vague.
Well,
I don't know
that's
what
the
they
part
talked
we
about.
then made up.
Well, so we didn't use that one.
But
That one
seriously,
hit the
the
cutting room floor.
reenactments, the idea for that. I mean, I have an issue with reenactments sometimes in documentaries because often you feel the director going, yeah, now I'm making a movie. And they try and make them super polished. And I think the more movie-like you make them, the less true and emotional they feel. And for us, the reenactments were a way of trying to get into the headspace of what it might be like to either become a Scientologist or to be in the church at that level. So the great thing was we could make them deliberately kind of B-movie in feel, which suited our budget as well. So it was very much Ed Wood was the aesthetic we were going for, rather than La La Land.
And in fact, the fear, because you know, the other thing to acknowledge is the level of fear that surrounds covering Scientology. There's sort of the sense that, okay, they're going to try and sue you and put you out of business.
They have a lot of resources. I mean,
I hope you have lawyers, Charles, by the way. I should have said this before we came out here. Because we're live, aren't we?
We are live, exactly.
Are we?
I've gotten a few emails from them before for stories.
This is going out. We could say anything, and then our lives will change as we attempt to, you know, fight the lawsuits that come raining down on us. But you know, I think it's just I lost my thought totally. What was it?
We were talking about there was a fear for these people
the
to speak
fear
out
factor,
because of the lawsuits and
so I
the
think
notorious.
there's a sense of fear, and I think credit goes to anyone who's involved and who's willing to sort of speak their truth bravely.
Yeah, I mean, speaking on that, you know, there's the Paul Haggises, the Leah Remini's, you know, the Tony Ortega, who's got a very popular blog. Did you reach out to these guys? I mean, obviously, there's only so many people you can have involved with this sort of production, but you know,
We
what
spoke
was
to
the
all sides.
correspondence?
We reached out to Scientology, by the way, you know, and it was very much not our aim to have a kind of easy anti-Scientology film, you know, and the doors remained open to Scientology.
I was in
throughout
contact
the process.
with Tom Cruise's agent. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever get a Tom Cruise movie now.
There was more, when we embarked on the legal process, there was probably more fear about what Tom Cruise's lawyers might do than what Scientology's lawyers would do. I don't know what that... So maybe our next film should be about Tom.
And what have the guys thought, you know, once you started screening it for people involved with the process? And, you know, what do they think of how it, you know, how it shares their story, you know, how it shares the story of the religion?
That's a really good question. The main character, obviously, the main contributor and subject to the film is Marty Rathbun. And to begin with, he liked it, I would say. And then later on, he didn't like it. But I think that's part of a bigger story. There's a wider context for that to do with, I think Marty's got to the point where he's so sick of being the go-to guy of anti-Scientology that in a spirit of rebelliousness and exasperation, and maybe worn down by all the harassment he's experienced from Scientology, he sort of seems to have made peace with Scientology. That was my take.
That's a good way of putting it.
I've practiced that for the past couple of days.
I should practice that version as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's even, you know, YouTube videos out there of Marty getting harassed at his home and that sort of thing. I mean,
yeah, he had them outside. I mean, we joke about them following us, but actually, what happened to us was on an incredibly minor scale and actually very useful for the film. But for the likes of Marty and Tom DeVock, you know, Marty had them living outside his house for over a year. Can you imagine that? People outside your house, those guys in those wacky T-shirts with the cameras
basically filming him and kind of provoking him to get a reaction in the hope that he would eventually tire of it so much that he might punch one of them, and then they'd get he'd get arrested, they'd get a lawsuit, they'd get it on camera, and then they can make a kind of web documentary showing Marty to be, you know, out of control.
I mean, that's the thing is, you do such a deep dive on these things. I don't know about you guys, but every time I, read Going Clear or whatever, I start going on the internet, and there's so much information out there. It must have been hard to sort of weed through it all. And what was
That's
your
the
own personal
hardest part. It's
experience?
such a wilderness of amazing stories, and then you've got the books Going Clear by Lawrence Wright. You've got Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman. There's other great books. Then there's websites that are labyrinths of material. Tony Ortega's blog site. There's one called Clambake. And you can just, because this has been going on for 50 years. There have been disgruntled ex-Scientologists making amazing claims going back to the mid-50s.
That was one of the hardest things when we set out, apart from obviously having no access, no story. But
an unpredictable presenter.
Yes. It's quite overwhelming because it's been going since, the 60s. Paul Thomas Anderson made the movie The Master just about, I was going to say Philip Seymour Hoffman, but about L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah. And we hardly went anywhere near L. Ron Hubbard.
No, there's space, there's space to do 100 different movies about Scientology. And, you can see it in Leah Remini's new series. I think what's different about what she's done is you've got 8 parts, and it's given them the space to explore these individual stories of families. I don't know how many of you know about disconnection, but it's this policy that Scientology has that if you speak out and leave Scientology and say, it's BS, then basically, at that point, the family's disconnected, and families are broken up. You can no longer speak to your family because they're Scientologists in good standing. They still believe they can't be exposed. They're not allowed to be exposed to your negative thinking. So she's done that really interesting, good work on all of that. I mean, you could do an 8-part doc on the history of Scientology, don't you think?
Well, I'm not going to.
I'm pitching that right now.
What would you guys
find a different director for that?
What would you guys want to do next? I mean, are you? What's the next subject for you, Lewis?
What do you think, John? I don't know. There's so much material. I've always thought that there'd be something in. Well, I was going to say the Islamic State, but that looks like it's being rubbed off the map as we speak. I might have missed my window on that.
Yeah, that's one I'm not really keen on.
Well, we have some questions there in the audience. We're going to start right there.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say I'm a huge fan, so it's an honor.
Thank you.
An honor to be in your presence. I've grown up watching you and your
Thank you.
series, your documentaries, everything you've done. It's really inspired me to go forward and make a difference by informing people. And I think part of your appeal is your ability to humanize people. And so, first question, what was the hardest interview you've ever done? You've done Westboro Baptist Church, which obviously people have a lot of opinions on. You've gone to prisons, you've done a lot. What was the hardest for you?
I'm going to surprise you. Well, first of all, thank you for everything you said. That really cheers me up because in America, I don't have the profile that I do in the UK, so I'm always grateful if anyone's even heard of me over here. So that's great.
He is a citizen. He's a dual citizen.
I have I have a US passport. I'm a dual citizen, but I'm not a sort of dual citizen of the TV universe, if you like. YouTube. Check it out, YouTube. I'm also on Netflix now, it turns out. Like 20 years
I watched
later.
you on Netflix, absolutely, yeah.
So the hardest, in fact, people talking is easy, and because it signals emotional availability. Like Westboro Baptist Church, those to me were not especially hard interviews. They were because they're there, they're communicating, they're sharing time, and in sharing time and making themselves open and available, you build up rapport, and a little part of you seeps into them. That's a kind of weird image.
That's really, yeah, unfortunate turn of phrase.
But if you know what I mean. What's more difficult is if someone's extremely shy or extremely sensitive. I attempted to do a documentary about Ike Turner, the ex-husband of Tina Turner, well-known from the movie. Well, a fictional version of him is well-known from What's Love Got to Do With It. I filmed with him for 5 or 6 days. I actually rather liked him, but it was one of the most challenging interviews I've ever done because he was just exquisitely thin-skinned. And if you even mentioned Tina Turner, he would kind of, he'd blanch and slightly, but almost imperceptibly and leave the room, and then later you'd hear from his agent, well, you know, wow, I really wasn't happy about the way that went. And we had to pull the plug because I wasn't able to in any way reveal him or get to him on camera.
Good question. Next one, right there.
Thanks for being here. Louis, I'm also a huge fan of your work.
Thank you. We've got 2 viewers.
It's interesting, actually. How many people in this audience are familiar with Louis' work? It's not bad for the
that's
States,
not
is
bad.
it?
But now the guys who haven't seen it are looking a little embarrassed.
Sick obsession with the Westboro Baptist Church and like what their ideologies are. I even used them for like a sociology paper, and I used your documentaries for them. So I'm curious, would you go back a 3rd time now that we're in a brand new political climate? And also, for this film, what was the most surprising thing you learned about Scientology?
I would not go back. I don't think. You know, never say never, but I don't think it's likely at all. And I think one of the things about Westboro is they are so out there in left field that the political climate for them never changes. They would not see much difference between Trump or Bush or Obama. In fact, one thing that often surprises people is when in their track record of political activity, of which there is some, the Phelps clan have done more volunteering for the Democrats. They're more active in kind of pro-Democrat fundraising, although they haven't done it recently. So they you know, Trump doesn't make any difference. You know, they have their own kind of strange way of carrying on, and their internal dynamics that can change and might be interesting. I think they've changed their leadership. I think Shirley Phelps, who I interviewed, has been edged out, but it's not enough to go back for. And John, you do the second one. What was the most surprising thing?
I mean, I think one of the sequences I'm most fond of in the film is when we try and reenact the actual Scientology drills. Because normally in a Scientology documentary, all you really see is somebody sort of grasping the hands of the cans of an e-meter, and that's taken as a shorthand. But there's so much of it, and we got Louis and Marty to take you through the training routines, and you know, some of them actually, you know, look quite useful. The bear baiting, you know, where you sit opposite someone and scream abuse at them. I mean, there's a lot of people like that.
That was fine, and then someone a couple of days ago said, "But why were you screaming at an ashtray?"
Well, that's scripture.
And then I was like, "Yeah, it is." And they're like, "Yeah, but why? What's that about?" And I was like, you know, it really stumped me. Like, I'm not sure why you do scream at an ashtray in Scientology.
Aren't you just trying to perfect your tone 40?
It's about creating, because I did think about it, it's about creating attention and intention. It is, which is tone 40. It's basically, are we answering why you scream at ashtrays? It's so that you can put your sense of influence across. Does that?
To an ashtray.
Why
Well,
an ashtray?
if you get to OT8, Operating Thetan 8, which Tom Cruise is, you can communicate with animals and move
Man, you're thinking of Dr. Dolittle.
No,
that was a different movie.
And move inanimate objects such as ashtrays with your own mind. So somebody, when they interviewed Tom Cruise about his next movie, should ask him to move the ashtray or the coffee cup. That would be the real test of whether it's working for him.
That'd be
I'll wait for
interesting.
that.
Now there's
I'll be curious
one
to see who
last
steps up to that plate.
question right there.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much, guys. You guys are awesome. I was going to ask.
Thanks.
You said, you're welcome. You said for previous documentaries, people gave you access to kind of their world. Did you ever feel at this point, for doing this one, actual fear of what they might do to you or what could be done to protect their truth?
I would say I never felt physical fear. I felt disquiet. I felt a sense of, you know, being emotionally embattled on occasion. The scariest thing, it sounds maybe a bit banal, but it's the legal letters they send can be oddly frightening. And if you are on the receiving end of one, and especially if you think you are personally exposed, like if something you've said or done is in some way, you get a legal letter from them saying, we're going to sue you because what you've done is clearly libelous. It's actually more frightening than you might think. You know, I'd rather be punched in the face, to be honest with you.
Really?
I really would.
Actually, the legal letters were helpful as well. I mean, they were, you know, it's a bit worrying when you get a letter saying, if you carry on with this, we'll sue you for lots of money. But they kind of helped orientate us where we were at
Well,
what
during
point.
the process, anything they threw at us was obviously good because we knew that the film was going to contain, as part of its story, their attempts to handle and harass us. So there's a feeling like, wow, here you are, you've turned up right on time, you know, and if you get tired of shouting at me, go, your trailer's over there and there's some nibbles, kick back. But actually, once the movie process has ended, then you're like, you know, you can stop now. We've got as much as we need. And of course, then it turns out, no, we don't plan on stopping because we still think you are a squirrel or a suppressive person.
Well, you guys should absolutely check out this movie. It comes out Friday at the ArcLight in LA, and then here at the Landmark Sunshine in New York, and then on demand.
On
correct?
demand, on all sorts of platforms.
One more round of applause for Louis and
Thank you.
John. Thanks so much, guys.